A new CBS News poll is showing us what Americans think now about the economy and the war in the Middle East, with major implications for 2024. Just 38% approve of President Biden's handling of the economy, and most Americans also say the condition of the economy is bad, despite recent positive economic news. CBS News Executive Director of Elections and Surveys, Anthony Salvanto, joins us now to break it down. Hey, Anthony, how are you?
Hey, Nancy, good to talk to you.
Yeah, so the Biden administration is saying unemployment is down, wages are up, inflation is way down, but you found that many Americans simply still feel lousy about inflation.
Yeah, simplest answer is usually best, so look at this. Is your income keeping pace with inflation? And 3/4 say no, it's not. So while those national job numbers, which people say are good, are there, while the rate of inflation is slowing, the prices they're paying for goods are still high. And so that's how you get here, that they don't feel like they're able to keep up. Now, I'll add this. When the White House talks about those national numbers, we asked, you and I have talked about this, what is it that people weigh when they evaluate them? Well, the national data, okay, 2/3 of people say they look at that. But look how much higher they rate their own experiences, people that they know, what's happening to them, and businesses in their community. That's the close, that's the personal, and that's what goes into these metrics even more, Nancy.
And certainly if you're looking to get a car loan or a mortgage, you don't feel like things are getting better. Anthony, what are Americans saying about their chances of getting ahead in this economy?
Yeah, that's so important, and it's something that we found in the poll is really stands out, especially for people in their key earning years, Gen Xers, millennials. They feel like their standard of living is worse than their parents' was at this same time in their lives. That runs a little counter to what we traditionally think of as the American dream, right? That you're going to be better off. And that's really a function coming out of the pandemic. We've seen people compare the way things were pre-pandemic and then afterwards. And in this poll, people tell us they feel like what the economy went through during the pandemic, during the shutdowns, and then this inflationary period afterwards has really left a mark, and it's still lingering in how people feel and how they compare to their past, to the past before that pandemic.
Right. And so if the White House is hoping that people's attitudes about the economy are going to change, they're going to have to wait a little longer. You also took a look, Anthony, at how Americans are feeling about the Israel-Hamas war, and that's fascinating. What did they say?
I did. Start with this, because people start with results when they make these evaluations. You get this bulk of people saying the administration isn't having an impact in bringing the conflict to a peaceful resolution. After that, his handling overall has gone down. But I would also point out this, Nancy. Within the Democratic Party, we talked about some divisions there. We've got an increase from 28 to 38 in the number of Democrats who feel like Biden is showing too much support for Israel. I want to keep an eye on that because, of course, for any president, having that unified party behind them in their approach to foreign policy, always critical, Nancy.
Yeah, it really demonstrates the shifting opinions about this conflict and about Israel and the Palestinians. Anthony Salvanto, thanks so much.
Thank you.
President Biden's unwavering support for Israel could also cost him some support in the important swing state of Michigan. CBS's Ed O'Keefe spoke with Arab Americans there about the president's re-election bid.
You voted against Donald Trump in 2020.
Yes.
You would skip voting for president in 2024,
Yes.
even if it meant Donald Trump might win the presidency.
If you were to tell me that my vote would be the vote whether Biden wins in Michigan or not, I will still not vote for Biden.
It's that much of an issue for you.
Yeah, my people dying is that much of an issue for me.
Well, Ed O'Keefe and Bo Erickson join us now. Ed is CBS News senior White House and political correspondent. Bo is a CBS News White House reporter. Good to have you both here. It's a White House reunion.
It is.
And Ed, I'm going to start with you because that was a really fascinating clip that you played. Arab Americans make up, I think, about 3% of the population in Michigan, but they went overwhelmingly for President Biden in 2020. And so a loss of this group, among this group in 2024, could cost him in a swing state.
It could. Consider this. The president won Michigan in 2020 by about 150,000 votes. About 146,000 Muslims living in Michigan voted in 2020. So that right there, if conceivably, as Adam told us, most of his neighborhood, many of his friends were to stay home or at least leave that question on the ballot blank could be robbing the president of the margins he needs to win. And that's what's so concerning to either side of this is if you're looking at a turnout game in November next year, you have to turn out everyone you possibly can find. Right now, this group of voters in a key swing state is telling the Biden campaign, stay away. Donald Trump was bad because he supported the Muslim travel ban, said a lot of derogatory things about Arab or Muslim Americans. But President Biden is supporting an Israeli government that is killing tens of thousands of their neighbors, their friends, their relatives, and they can't stand for it.
And the White House has made sure to emphasize, especially recently, all the humanitarian aid they're providing to the Palestinians in Gaza. But it sounds like that may not be quite enough to sway this group. Bo, you were in Las Vegas Friday and over the weekend covering the president there, and you spoke to some voters. What did they have to tell you?
So the president has been holding a lot of events at union halls. It really kind of revs up the crowd. There's kind of built-in audience for the president. And then this allows the president kind of talk about his middle-class credibility. And I was asking a lot of the voters there how they thought the economy was doing, and we can listen to some of that sound.
My family, like every other family, has had to pinch pennies to adapt to the rising prices. But at the same time, I know that the employment numbers have been strong, and so there's always a flip side of the coin.
Yesterday, I was stopped in the grocery store because mayonnaise was $7, and it was hard for me not to say a lot of this is because of corporate greed.
So those may be Vegas prices for the mayonnaise.
$7 for mayonnaise. Wow.
But I think these are Democratic voters. They supported President Biden in 2020, and they're kind of hinting on some of this pressure that they're under. And that woman, her name is Margie, she kind of underscored the current political calculus, I think, when it comes to a lot of these Democratic voters. She's thinking next November, she said, whether Democrats are mad at Joe Biden, they're going to be more mad at Donald Trump. And even if they have to hold their nose, they're going to support Joe Biden. She's a local Democrat activist, so she's still feeling confident.
Is that what the White House is banking on?
It
that
is.
these voters will come home at the end of the day?
It is, and it's why I kind of am intrigued by that is that Adam, who you saw there earlier, had said to me, if you asked me 2 months ago before the conflict began what I would do, he said, I will, quote, hold my nose and vote for Joe Biden because he's not happy about the economy. Now, of course, he's got that other issue. So what the Biden campaign is trying to do, they've rolled out about a $25 million TV ad campaign, at least initially in the swing states. Most of those ads focused on the economy, most of them starring what we would call real people, not the president or the vice president, but people talking about how prices lower for insulin or for their prescription drugs have helped them and their bottom lines. That speaks to something we found in the poll, which is about 8 in 10 plus Americans say the way they're measuring economic health and viability right now is from personal experience or what is happening to their spouse or their neighbors or their friends, not economic data like a lower unemployment rate and declining inflation, which is what the White House is constantly talking about. So they realize they've got to make a more personal connection with these voters to win them back.
It's a lagging indicator. Bo, you had some really interesting reporting today about the Biden campaign's fundraising efforts. What can you tell us?
So looking under kind of the hood of this fundraising machine, there is some concern by top donors who are saying that the White House and the president hasn't really been engaged to the level that they should have been the past 3 years. And so one donor was telling me, now that it's go time, the campaign is like, where is everybody at? So I asked the Biden campaign about this, and they said this may be a little bit more isolated criticism. And they point to the $72 million and the $71 million that the president has raised in the past 6 months. He's doing a lot of fundraising this week. He's been to 36 fundraisers since relaunching his campaign in April.
Ed O'Keefe, Bo Erickson, thanks so much.